Hi everyone, here's the Book Chemist once again, and today I'm reviewing The Candy House by Jennifer Egan, the sequel to her Pulitzer Prize-winning novel A Visit from the Goon Squad. Jennifer Egan is in the very inner circle of my very favorite writers. Her novel The Keep is at least a candidate to the title of my favorite book of all times, and I've also loved Look at Me and Goon Squad. But when I first heard that she was gonna write and publish a sequel to Visit from the Goon Squad, I was actually quite surprised. Not so much by the idea of a sequel, it feels like writers are doing that more and more these days, and I am absolutely convinced that at one point in the next few years Michael Chabon is actually going to publish a sequel to The Amazing Adventures of Kavalier and Clay. I don't know why, I can just smell it in the air. Not so much, I wasn't surprised by the idea of a sequel, but by the choice of the novel. A sequel, almost by definition, implies an evolution on the plot of a previous novel, and I'm not sure there is much of a plot in Visit from the Goon Squad to begin with. It's not so much the individual stories of the people in that novel that matter, even though they're all surprising and brilliant and entertaining, but the way these stories are juxtaposed and pitched against one another in the book. That's what's special about Goon Squad to me. It's a novel that manages, like few others, to show all the wistful and tragic and redeeming qualities of time, of the passing of time. It's a book that manages to show you how a single character can change at various moments in their lives. From, for instance, from a teenage punk rocker to a fairly spent, failing middle-aged man, to an old man staging an unlikely career comeback. To put this point, to package this point differently and put it in a different way, even though I reread Visit from the Goon Squad earlier this year, until last week I couldn't have told you much about its plot at all. Or what exactly happened in it. To me, that meant that I had to read Candy House alongside a summary of what happens in each chapter of Goon Squad, because Candy House does bring back many, if not most, of the characters from the previous novel, showing you how their lives changed after you last read about them in the previous book, focusing perhaps on the lives of some of their children, or zooming back at times in their lives that weren't covered in the previous book. The novel felt to me like a bit of a fun house, a puzzle or a game that can be played multiple times to uncover more of these connections and marvel at more of the nodes that form in this vast web of characters. And the thrill of finding these nodes is shouldn't really be dismissed as mere escapism, as just feeling good about remembering that one character from the previous book, or even just the pleasure of feeling smug at being able to keep in mind such a vast list of characters. Far from it, I think this pleasure is central to one of the concerns of the novel, which is showing the full well, it's letting the reader marvel at the full unpredictability and changeability of human experience, and the way people come together and fall apart and lose track of each other, the way they change throughout time, and find redemption in unlikely places, or see the promise of their youth squandered away. Candy House is all about unexpected connections and departures, and I think the brilliancy of it lies in the way Egan, in this novel, but I would argue in her fiction at large, is able to deal with human experience in a way that is at once very clear, but also full of kindness. One of the aphorisms, the many aphorisms in the book, the one that stayed with me maybe the most, is this idea that a happy ending is just a matter of looking away at the right time, presumably looking away while the story is still happy and before it turns bitter or disappointing. And I don't think anybody could call Candy House a feel-good novel. It's nothing of the sort, but it's brave enough, and it does indulge often enough in casting a light on these happy endings, these happy moments in people's lives, these moments where beauty and redemption and solace can be found even in broken and even in difficult lives. That's fairly unique, and it's hard to stress how stunning it is to experience these moments of beauty in the novel. One of the novel's main concerns is that, unlike what the self-aggrandizing power of social media leads us to believe, unlike what we may think in today's world of dozens of likes, thousands of followers, human experience is actually fairly unexceptional at the end of the day. This message, if handled by a different writer, could have easily been packaged as a terrifying, annihilating revelation, whereas in Candy House is often conveyed in terms that are quite gentle and at times even salvific. While these human concerns, I was gonna say human nourishment, but that sounds grossly cannibalistic. While these concerns are what I found brilliant and uplifting in the book, Candy House is not just a book about characters, both exceptional and fairly unexceptional lives. It's also a brilliant science fiction novel trying to imagine the next steps in the evolution of our interconnectedness. This is the world of the novel is a place where people upload their memories onto the internet for other people to browse. It's a world where people have devices implanted in their brains so that they can stream their experience and their consciousness to other people who are watching and experiencing them. These passages in the novel reminded me a lot of a great book that I like a lot, which is The Circle by Dave Eggers, another novel that ponders how the evolution of social media and social media conglomerates, especially social media as corporations, is gonna impact our societies and our very notions of privacy. And if anything, the way the novels handle this future world is quite different. Candy House's world building is much more subdued. You don't get a full picture of this future. You only get to see it almost through a keyhole, through a few glimpses at it. But if anything, I found the Candy House's predictions even more convincing than The Circle's. For the very simple reason that The Circle, at the end of the day, is quite obviously nightmarish, especially in its final chapters, in its predictions, whereas Candy House is a more subtle dystopian novel. It's the type of dystopian novel where the characters are actually convinced that they're happy. The subjects of this dystopian future are convinced that everything's dandy. And those dystopias, in my opinion, are much scarier and always much more convincing. It's why Brave New World to me is a much more convincing dystopia than the obvious excellent 1984. These reflections on the ghastly evolution of social media will keep the techno-thriller buffs entertained, but the book Candy House is actually perfect fodder for the literature scholars too. One of its central concerns is the notion of authenticity, especially in a world where everybody, almost all the time, is constantly projecting a certain image of themselves through social media profiles, through the internet in general, an obviously edited version of themselves that can be easily co-opted by corporations, by the market, by other ominous forces. For quite a while now, scholars have been debating whether a concern with sincerity is one of the key features of contemporary American fiction, what distinguishes it from the postmodern irony of the 70s and 80s. And Candy House is another step in that conversation, but I would argue that its concerns are rooted probably much further back and are central concerns that in one guise or another have always been at the heart of fiction, at the heart of fiction that dares to question its own nature and tries to understand what it's doing by creating and imagining the inner lives of people who never lived. It ponders some truly timeless questions through the lens of recent technology and imaginary future technology, without by any means novels trying to give a final answer to these questions, but while still advancing the conversation on them. Some of these questions include, for instance, whether fiction can still have a place in a world where, thanks to technology, we have other means of stepping into other people's consciousness, where fiction is no longer the only way we have of accessing other people's minds. Or again, is uploading our memories onto the internet, on a social media website, really that much more nightmarish than sharing your memoir with others? Or again, why do we get so worked up about the insincerity of social media profiles, but keep in such high regard something such as fiction, which by definition is insincere? It's lies about the lives of people who never existed. Candy House is a paradox of a novel that feels inexhaustible in its potential, and I'm sure it's gonna bear many rereadings. I couldn't have asked for a better book, and I should also mention that it's quite daring even in its form. In the same way as Goon Squad already was, these chapters that are narrated in the form of instant messages, for instance, or as mantras that a character is repeating to herself in the course of a special mission, they would feel gimmicky in a different context, but because the prose of the novel in the more canonical standard, call it what you will, in the more canonical chapters, because it's so brilliant and because the novel is so beautifully written on a sentence by sentence level, these chapters instead become all the more intriguing and stimulating and don't just feel like a distraction. They're integrated so well with the novel's concerns. I loved this novel. The passage where the Candy House image is used for the first time to describe the internet was nothing short of blood-chilling, and I found myself on the edge of, on the verge of tears many times, moved by the novel's warmth and its empathy for all sorts, all varieties of human experience. I couldn't recommend it more highly. I think it's an amazing novel that is gonna appeal, because there's so much going on in it, it's gonna appeal to so many different readers, fans of speculative fiction, imaginative fiction, fans of the good old literary fiction that just digs very deep into the psyche of a few more or less unique characters. I suggest you read it shortly after Goon Squad. In fact, I suggest you read both of them one after the other. And yeah, if you've read Goon Squad some time ago, be prepared to need a refresher, because chances are you're not going to remember who exactly Lulu is, or Dolly, or Lou, and so on and so forth. Thank you so much, as always, for watching the video. If you've read Candy House, I really look forward to reading what you thought of the novel. Were you as smitten as I was? Were you a bit more skeptical? Let's discuss it in the comments to the video. Thank you again, and bye everybody.